Hey, want to know how to take a spring and a strut and make a coilover? Fine, I'll show you. All right, before we get started, let's get our gear all laid out. You're going to need your Foam Cell Pro strut. You're going to need instructions, a 2.5 mil Allen wrench, a 19 millimeter gear wrench, a crescent wrench or pliers, your strut top, and your hardware pack. All right, let's get this bad boy out of the box. We got our strut. Get it unwrapped and laid out. And we got a hardware pack full of bushings and washers. The parts on your strut, starting from the bottom to the top, you got your lower bushing. That's what your lower shock bolt goes through. It's natural rubber. You got a super beefy stem here, 360-degree welded. They're fusion welded and then 360 MIG welded on. Then you move up to the threaded shock body. Again, these things are almost 3 inches in outer diameter. They're 1/8 inch thick, twin tube. Things are built like tanks. Then you've got your adjustable lock collars, and these are how you adjust your preload on your coil up and down. You've got your spring seat, and then you've got your rubber isolator, and that's what your coil sits down on. Then moving up, you've got your piston shaft. It's really important to remember you don't want to ding this, so don't hit it with anything, don't drop it, take care of it. If this gets nicked up or dinged or gets a burr in it, it will eventually over time wear out your seal and you'll get a leak. One thing that's different with Foam Cell Pro technology is these struts are not under a nitrogen charge. So you can see you can compress the piston down and it doesn't pop back. It's under neutral pressure, neutral buoyancy. So when you get them out of the box, you've got to extend the piston shaft all the way out. And one quick easy trick to do that is keep the nylock nut on the top. So find yourself a place where you can hang it and it won't fall and it'll extend under its own weight. While we're waiting for our shock to extend, let's talk about the strut top. Now, whether you're using an Ironman 4x4 strut top or a different brand, it might come with a couple different pieces. Some strut tops come with the lower bushing already installed, and some you have to install them on your own. Our hardware pack comes with extra bushings, so if you need one, we give you one. This isolator here, the top coil isolator, you can see that these little reliefs here, they need to match up with your studs. So when you put them on, make sure that they're aligned correctly, and it'll look something like that. Comes with 2 bushings and 2 washers. The small washer goes underneath, and that's gonna capture the lower bushing. This is the lower bushing that we include, so if your strut top doesn't have one, make sure that the flanged side goes up into the housing of your strut top. This large bushing, that fits on top, followed by the large washer which caps on top like that, and then your threaded shaft comes up, cap it off with the nylock nut. All right, let's get our coils out. These are Ironman 4x4 Toyo 55B performance coils. They come nicely wrapped so they don't get damaged in shipping. Let's get this guy out of his cocoon. Welcome to the world. This guy's gonna be a big kid. Make sure you take care of him. He's powder coated. You don't want to ding him all up, okay? It's gonna be okay. So this is our strut compressor. It's an industry standard, Brannock 7600. I really like using a manual strut compressor because you get that immediate feedback. So if you're setting it up and something doesn't feel right, you know it. A lot of guys in shops use hydraulic compressors, and those are great and they're faster, but they can be dangerous, so take your time and go slow. I've actually personally been standing next to one when it came apart, and I'm surprised it didn't kill somebody. So please be careful. So I want to show you one thing on strut compressors. When you're using them, make sure you wrap the fingers that grab onto the coils with something to protect it. It's sharp metal underneath, so wrap it in painter's tape or some hard rubber, something so that you do not chip the powder coat on the coil. So many guys they get in a rush and they go too fast and they actually chip and damage that powder coating, and it introduces an area for corrosion to get in, and it's really, really hard to chase rust once it gets underneath powder coat. So when you're setting up adjustable coilover struts, the name of the game is go slow, take your time, make sure everything feels right. Also, read your instructions on your strut compressor. If you have any questions about doing this, if you're doing it yourself and you don't feel comfortable, go have a pro do it. So your coil, it's not flat. It has a certain angle or pitch to the coil itself. So these fingers are adjustable. So make sure that you get that pitch on the finger to match that ramp of your coil. So here on our Lexus GX460, you can see the strut top here that fits up into the perch. It's worth taking note where these pins are aligned, the way that they're clocked. So it's 2 pins facing outward towards the wheel and 1 all the way in the back towards the engine. So when we take our strut mount and we go to set up our adjustable coil-over, we'll make sure we remember the positioning so that we set it up correctly. Let's get our strut top put up on top of our coil. So I have a couple little preferences that I like to do. One is I don't like this top termination on the coil to line up with one of these studs because it might put extra pressure and kill your isolator over time. So I try to split the difference and set it up like that. I also like to set up my coil so I can see the part numbers. They're facing out towards the wheels. So when I'm at the mall bragging to all the cool kids, they know I'm the real deal. When you're setting up your coil and your strut top, you need to conceptualize that this is the vehicle, like you're standing at the wheel well. And one problem that you run into is even though we have this set up so it's facing correctly out towards us, these top fingers are going to be in the way of our strut top studs. So we need to change our positioning. Now we can go left or right, it doesn't matter, but just remember, if we're changing our approach, we need to keep that in mind. So I'm going to rock this 1/3 to the left so that we can get our fingers onto our strut top. And now, if I was standing at the wheel well, I would be looking at the coil head on this way. So another way to get your positioning correct is if you pull your stock strut out before you put this together, you can also kind of mark and get a better understanding. So you can use it as a template or a guide. You can hold it next to you and go, okay, if this is how it goes, if this is how my stock one fits, this is how the Ironman 4x4 one is going to fit. So I do that too sometimes. All right, now that we have the top fingers all lined up, we're going to sandwich them down on top of our strut top. And there's 2 ways to do it. You can either clamp down on the top of the strut top or you can clamp down on the coil, but I like to clamp down on top of the strut top because it gives us a nice flat surface and it ain't going anywhere anyways. So we'll give this about 4 or 5 good turns. Again, we're going slow and you can feel it as you tighten it down. We continually check our coil to make sure that it's not warping or bending. You want it to compact in a very linear fashion. And that's probably pretty close. Now we're ready to put the Foam Cell Pro strut in. And now what we need to do is we need to set up our lower spring seat adjustment based on what type of vehicle we're installing it in and how much lift we want. So for the new Toyota 4Runner we're going to install this in, the lower spring seat height needs to be set to 8.5 inches. And we have a guide online too if you have any questions. It's a great reference. So we're a little bit short there. So to adjust that, what I do is I'll slide the spring seat up. And you always measure here at the lowest dip in the trough. So put your tape measure in there. And then we measure to the center bore of the bushing. So we're still a little short. We'll come up a little bit more. And we're a little high. So 8.5's right about there. So now that we've got an approximate measurement, we're going to spin the first lock collar up. Ooh, this Foam Cell Pro's a Goldilocks. That's just right. So once we know that our measurement's good, we can spin the lower lock collar up against the top lock collar, and it'll lock our height setting in place. So now that we've got our spring seat height set where we want it at 8.5, we're just going to lock these 2 collars together. So grab yourself a couple punches or a couple Allen wrenches, something you can get into those holes on the lock collars, and just give them a little bit of pressure, and now they're set. One thing I would recommend not doing right now is, if you see, Ironman 4x4 has added these little set screws or grub screws. Don't tighten them down yet, because once you get them in your vehicle, if you decide that you don't like the way your truck's sitting, if you need to raise it or lower it, If you tighten these set screws down now, you might mar these threads, and if you have to do any adjustment, it's a real pain to back them off and then try to adjust these lock collars because the threads are beat up. So wait till you've got it set exactly where you want it, and then you can tighten them down. This piece stays here. Also, if you have any questions about the way that this setup works, check in your instructions. We'll pull the nylock nut off. We will take our small included washer. That goes on top of the stem. It's cupped upward. We already have the bushing underneath the strut top, so that's what this will encapsulate when we tighten it down. Also, another thing to notice is, see the threads here on the top of our shock shaft? These threads, there's just enough threads so that when we go to put it together, we're going to lock the nut all the way down. Then you don't have to worry about torque settings. Tighten it as far as you can. There we go. Up and through. We'll go bushing, washer, and spin that nut on just like that. And spin it all the way down so you can see these flat so we can get it with a wrench. And then you can let it hang. Now we need to tighten it down. Grab yourself your crescent wrench and your 19mm ratcheting gear wrench. What we're going to do here, set your wrench to tighten. Throw that over the lock nut, and then get that crescent wrench on the flats, and we'll start locking it down. Now earlier I mentioned that there's not a torque spec for this nylock nut, and that's because Ironman 4x4 has built the top of this shaft with just enough threads, so you want to lock it all the way down. It'll bottom out right where it needs to be. So while you're locking this top nut down, it draws the bottom of the strut up towards the coil. So make sure you've compressed your coil enough so you have some working room here. And also make sure you do not use an impact gun on this. I've seen guys do it. All it does is spin the entire nut and the shaft. It will spin the piston inside of the shock body, and it can scratch it and damage your shock internally. You don't want to do that. So make sure when you're tightening this up, always use hand tools, a ratcheting wrench, and some kind of wrench to hold the flats on this shock post so that it keeps it from spinning. As you lock this down, you'll see that bushing will start to squish out. There you go. So remember earlier how I was telling you, you want to situate your coil like you're standing at the wheel well so that the two studs on the top of your strut top mount are facing out. We've got our part numbers out, all that. So you can set them up for driver's side or passenger side. This one I'm going to set up as a driver's side. I want the sticker facing forward, and the mount, the shock mount, should be perpendicular to the way that the strut top's going to mount in the vehicle. So that is just about perfect, and then we can rotate our lower spring seat around. And one thing right here to note is as we loosen our strut compressor, it's going to take pressure off the spring, and this will tighten up. So make sure the end of your coil isn't jammed up against this ramp. You actually want it backed away just a hair so that it doesn't touch, because eventually over time it'll just eat that isolator away if it's up against that ramp, and then you'll have metal on metal. Don't want that. So now that we have it clocked correctly and aligned in position, we can take the tension off. So slowly back it out, and sometimes I even get down here and watch that lower spring seat, and with one arm just loosen it up. You do not want to put your fingers or anything close to here. Good way to lose your fingers. We'll double check that spring seat so that the coil's not against that ramp. Nice and slow. Cool. All right, this turned out perfect. We didn't scratch or chip our powder coat. It's positioned exactly how we want it. We can see our part numbers, our high-speed stickers. This thing looks great. Now, all we need to do is get it installed, see how the truck's gonna sit, and if it's at the correct ride height that we want, we can tighten up our set screws, and we're done. All right, it's time to get this beast installed into our rig. Don't forget the hardware that you're gonna need for your strut top. Hey, I hope you liked the video. I wanna take a minute to thank my good buddy Brannick. Couldn't have done it without his support. If you wanna check out this awesome gear, get yourself some, go to Ironman4x4America.com. You can also follow us around on the social medias at Facebook, Instagram, and the whatnot.